Tighten up, leaders. Welcome to the Nuts and Bolts of Leadership, the show that drills into the foundations of what leadership is all about. I'm your producer and co-host, Hali Gibson.
And I'm your host, Billy Duran.
Join us as we sit down with leaders from across the country to mine for nuggets of wisdom.
All right, everyone, welcome into the meeting room. Today, we're going to be talking about leadership because this is the Nuts and Bolts of Leadership podcast. I'm the host, Billy Duran. I'm in the meeting room today with Hali Gibson, our producer and co-host. Hali, it's good to have you back in the meeting room. You were out on assignment last week, so good to have you back. I'm waiting for the nugget of the week.
I was out on assignment at the EO24 conference with the National ESOP Association, and that's what brought my nugget. So we had one of the main speakers, Krista Washington. She told a story about when she was in this hotel room, the alarm went off. And her and her husband, quickly put on their clothes, ran out the door, and they could see all of these people just kind of meandering around, not doing anything, waiting for someone to kind of tell them what to do. And, they went outside, they found another hotel room, and then they realized that all of the people that were in that hotel waited for someone to tell them what to do. They even stayed in a ballroom in another hotel because they didn't think about, I can go get another hotel room somewhere else. Well, funny enough, 2 days later at the conference, I'm standing in line waiting to get my lunch, and the alarm goes off in the hotel. And I kind of wait, and I'm looking around. I'm like, okay, I'll give it a couple seconds. Normally, sometimes alarms will come on and they'll come off. So 30 seconds. 30 seconds is a long time to wait for an alarm if there's something going on. So I step out of line. I put my half-made plate down, and I start walking towards the door. And so it's about a minute into the alarm going off, and a speaker comes on and says, please wait. We're trying to find the source of the alarm, but, don't worry, there's no, immediate harm. Out of hundreds of people in the ballroom, only a couple started moving at a minute out. And so I really thought, wow, you really do get this group mentality when you're all together. And it is really hard to be one of those people to move out of line, no matter what the situation might be. And, Krista Washington, I thought there was just some divine intervention with her in that alarm going off 2 days later.
So you're one of those people that just wants to get up and take the lead. I'm assuming that people started following you out of the building, or?
No, it would have been if the speaker had not come on. I think it would have been, I think people would have waited in enough time for
until
someone else,
smoke.
For an employee or someone to say, we've got to go, which I think is fair. It's a little bit of a commentary on how we do things
as a group. Yeah. Individuals, sometimes hard to stick out and do it different, walk against the grain, so to speak. But Hali, I'm excited today because we've got a person here on our wish list. We've been trying to get connected with Dr. Nathan Mellor, founder and CEO of Strata Leadership, an experienced executive coach, two-time TEDx speaker, author, and educator. And what's really cool about Nathan being with us today is that his team has been a part of our culture for years. I really like the way you wrote this, that we've been invested with Strata, and they become a part of our cultural investment plan at Thread Faster. So Nathan, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you. And it's an honor to be able to spend some time with you today.
And we found out that Nathan has a little Mobile background. So it's good to have a Mobilian with us on the podcast today. Nathan, you're one of those people, and we've had a few people on our podcast, one of those people that are in leadership training and coaching. It's not just that you're in a leadership position, even though you're in the day-to-day activity of training up leaders. And I know that's got to be rewarding. So we want to hear a little bit about, as we get started, about your leadership journey and what brought you to Strata Leadership.
Well, again, thank you for the invitation to be a part of the podcast. And I've had the chance to listen to quite a few of the podcasts that you've had in the past, and just really quality stuff. So thank you for that. I would say that my leadership journey began in a way that I was aware of, probably when I was still in elementary school. My dad grew up in a home that was a difficult home. His parents had been through a lot. His life was a bit challenging because of that. later they would grow into people that were loving grandparents. So the people that he knew as a parent, as his parents, they were very different from me by the time they were grandparents. But my dad grew up just loving the underdog and being committed to that. And so growing up, I don't remember a time in my life where we didn't have children in our home who were there in foster care. And sometimes it would be a weekend or a couple of weeks, but most commonly it'd be 2 or 3 years at a time that they would be living in our home. And I think back about that time, and I loved living in Mobile, and I started off in Spanish Fort and then in Daphne. And I remember the afternoon we were in Daphne, and they brought a young boy to our home. He was 3 years old. His name was Adam. And Adam, was one of those kids who just had been through a lot already. His mother, in a drunken and drug-induced state, had put him as a baby into scalding hot water and just burned every part of his body that water touched. And Adam was brought to our home because he needed a safe place to live. And I remember Dad bringing us together before this, saying, this is what's going on. This is why Adam's going to be coming to our house, and we need to do what we can to help Adam. Now, at that point, we didn't know he was going to live with us for the next 3 years, but it was this idea that your life is not your own and that you are here to serve and to help. And I have watched my parents live that way their whole lives. And my dad's motto is to say yes. How can you help? To say yes. And I would say, watching him and my mother, that's where leadership was expected. You were expected to make a difference, and service always makes a difference.
So, Nathan, I love already dropping some nuggets on us here, particularly that your dad's commitment to loving the underdog, the commitment to fostering and loving on children, and making that, whether it's a 3-month or 3-year commitment, an impact on their life. Sound to me like your dad was a life coach, and you grew up around that leadership model. Your life is not your own. And I appreciate the way that you said that and framed that about your dad, because I'm thinking about people that have made an impact in our lives and how at times we don't recognize the impact until years later, that they were sowing something. They were sowing seeds into our life, and they didn't get to take root and bloom until later. And it sounds like your dad was planting those seeds all along. So when your experience as a leader, how does that come forward now into what you're doing and planting those seeds and helping nourish and nurture those emerging leaders?
I think it's everything that you are dedicating yourself to helping other people thrive. And when you think about the emerging leader, the studies behind what people go through as an emerging leader would indicate that the biggest challenge they have is not a skill set shift. It's a mindset shift, because they are moving from being rewarded for being the doer to being the orchestrator of the doing. And so it's an identity change. And so when you've got people who are going through that moment in life when they recognize it's not just me doing a good job, it's me helping other people do a good job, that is at the heart of an emerging leader. And I would watch my dad do that. He was a football coach, a teacher. And even now, when I come back to Mobile, and I don't get to come back often, but when I come back, I'd be hard pressed to think of a time where I was in Mobile and did not have someone come up to me and shake my hand because of who my dad was in their life. And the role of coach was, you are dedicated to someone else's success. You can't be on the field. You can't play the game. All you can do is prepare, encourage, inspire. And his whole thing was, and why he was a great coach, is he loved football, but he didn't. The reason he was a great coach was because he loved the kids. And he knew he was training them for life, and it happened to be through football. What I see in great companies, it's the same mentality. What they do is important, but it's not nearly as important as who they're doing life with.
I'm getting a little emotional listening to what you're saying, because I'm thinking about how the identity of a coach. I remember this throughout my career. The people that made the impact maybe not were the people that were the most technical, but the people that was the most caring and most concerned and genuinely cared about your success and your growth and where you were and really how you were doing. I can just, people's faces are popping up in my mind. But Nathan, when we talk about this leader shift, great book John Maxwell wrote actually called Leader Shift, this idea that you are the high performer, the producer, the individual performer moving into a place of leadership. Is it some that just can't make that journey, that just can't move into that because they're a great performer, an individual contributor, but now I've got to lead this, my success is based on the team's success. Are there some that just can't make the shift?
There are definitely some that choose not to make the shift and prefer to work behind the scenes more. But I think more often than not, what you're dealing with is that wrestling between a fixed mindset and a growth mindset. And a fixed mindset would imply that when something is difficult, maybe it's not your thing. And so when you're trying something and you're uncomfortable with it, it doesn't seem to come natural to you, you can step back and say, that's just not my thing. The growth mindset would imply that it's not my thing yet, but I have to keep going through this. And here's the reality. You're not going to become an effective leader without also having to address discomfort. You can't be comfortable and grow. And so that's the part where if I'm in a nurturing environment, I'm much more likely to do that. But when you think about what that means, my first job I got in when I was in Mobile, I was 14. I didn't tell them how old I was, and I was a little bit big for my age and then didn't grow anymore. And so at 14, I got a job. I was the janitor. They called you the maintenance man, the janitor at the Bel Air Mall. And I got that job, and you got to the mall at 6 o'clock in the morning, and you would clock in. And the first day I went in, 6 o'clock in the morning, clocked in. Our crew is maybe 9 people, 12 people, whatever it is. We're kind of in this utility room. And somebody had found an old couch someplace, and they had that along one wall. The other wall was folding chairs, and you'd lean back against the wall with your folding chair. I get to the first day, I clock in at 6 o'clock, and the person leading our team, he says this, well, it's going to be a long day. It's going to be hot. Let's go ahead and take a break. Flips off the light for the first 30 minutes of the day. Flips the light back on, and they had figured out where the manager of the mall would park and how he got into the mall. And so he would drive down one road. He'd always park at the same spot. So we would go and clean that one area to make sure that part was clean so that he thought, well, everything's great. Then we would go to McDonald's for breakfast there in the mall. And we'd get in there, and you had 6 cash registers, but we would all line up with our red shirts with the maintenance Bel Air Mall patch on our shirt. We'd all line up there because one of the guys had a cousin who worked at the McDonald's, and you could order whatever you wanted, and they would ring it up as a sausage biscuit. Before 9 o'clock on my first day at work, I learned how to steal from my employer. I learned how to do the least amount possible to keep your job. And I learned how to steal from McDonald's by 9 o'clock. And I look at that and I think that is so different than my grandfather, who, when he came back from the war, his dream was to be a machinist or mechanic. And guess what? When we came back from the war, guess what? We had a ton of machinists and mechanics. So he became a postal carrier, a letter carrier, and carried the mail on his back for the next 30 years. Job 1. Job 2, he was the janitor at the bank. Job 3, he was the janitor at the church. When I think of my grandfather, I can literally smell the wax on the floor in that old bank. And the wax on that floor was like glass. And he was a respected man because of how he did his job. And what I learned from him is that your title doesn't define you. The way you do your job is what defines you. So he, as a janitor, did his job at a level worthy of respect. And what did I find? That if I'm working around people who are committed to being good enough not to get fired, you're never going to grow. And what I find is that there's more of that out there than there is the kind of place that cares about you enough to push you.
Those things play out, and we've seen some of these things play out. We've addressed some of these things, talked about it, and one of the things that I've kind of been on my soapbox lately is that pushing through the hard, because we all encounter the hard stuff. It doesn't matter if it's in your marriage or your job. You are going to encounter that. You use the word discomfort. But if we quit at the discomfort, you begin to develop a pattern of quitting when it gets hard, and you never break through. So pushing through the hard is such a critical component of moving in that shift in our mind. And I think it was great that you said it's not a skill set shift, it's a mindset shift. but being determined enough to push through the hard, because then the next time you come to the hard, you say, I've been here before. I've walked through this. And then the other thing about the match, we have one of our leaders. He said this he said this very distinctly in one of our leadership meetings. When people come to Threaded Fasters, they're looking for their match. If they're a high performer, they're looking for the high performer to match them. But if they're one of those mediocre or low performers, they're trying to find their match. And they will work just as hard as the person that they've matched up to. So I can see you smiling over there talking about, so this is resonating with you, I believe, a little bit.
It does. I had a unique conversation with the founder and CEO of the America's most profitable privately held retail company. This guy's a multi-billionaire. And I was asking about culture, and I was asking about, do you have to let people go a lot? And he said, no. He said, not really. He said, over the last 40 years, we've built a culture that when people come here and they don't want to work, the culture itself pushes them out, because the expectation is this is how we do things. And if you don't want that, you'll know pretty quick. But if you're looking for a place that's meaningful, now here's the thing. Most of those people who work there and maybe work where you are in other places, if I got their high school yearbook and I looked in the back and they said, where do you want to be 5 years from now? They would not have listed your company. But they want to work in a place where they can be who they want to be, and what you do there, they can learn. And that's the mentality. But I was also smiling because I was talking to my dad a while ago, and we were talking about in one of the games. I remember there was one of the guys out there who was he played defensive tackle, and he was doing the hand on his head, tapping his helmet, saying, I need to break. I need to break. And my dad won't respond to him. He won't take him out of the game. And one of the other coaches is yelling at my dad, get him out, get him out. And my dad turns, and they are going at it. The two coaches are going at it. He says, I'm not taking him out. And we're doing this back and forth. And he said to me afterwards, he said, he had more to give and he didn't know it. But if every time it's hard, every time he taps the top of his helmet, he comes out, he said he's going to do the same thing in his marriage. He's going to do the same thing at work. He said, why am I not letting him out? Because I want him to win. And we're not talking about football. Now, I guarantee you the guy in that moment did not think, you know what, I'm so grateful to have this wise coach. It would take years before a person who went through that experience would understand the gift he was given by someone being willing to do hard things for their benefit. But that's what leadership is. And that's why leadership, in my opinion, is a bit overrated in that however hard you think it is, it's harder than that, because you are investing in something that you are unlikely to see the benefit of. And so the only reason that you will do that is if you care deeply about people and care about them enough to invest in them, even when you may not see the benefit of that.
Yeah, and I'm thinking about all those teenagers that grew up in my house. I never heard of one say, I'm so thankful for that wise parent that I'm growing up under in this moment. So yeah, we are so grateful for you. And I mean, you're just hitting on all cylinders here. And I think, Hali, that's question one. So Nathan, I know now that you make your home, I believe, in Oklahoma City. Is that right? You're in Oklahoma City. And
that's right.
Tell our audience a little bit. Threaded Fasters knows a lot about the Character Core program, but tell our audience about kind of how that came to be, why you felt like this was important, and this was kind of your calling and moved in this direction,
Sure.
about how it came to be and then what's going on with Character Core these days.
Well, thank you. Character Core was an idea that was introduced to me by a guy named Tom Hill. And Tom was the president and now the chairman emeritus at Kimray, which is an oil and gas valve company located here in Oklahoma City. And I was working in university at the time, and he was on an advisory board, and we became friends. We started talking about life, and I had gotten promoted into this executive role, and it was not working. And I was working hard and could not get any breakthroughs, and I just didn't know what to do. And so I asked Tom, I said, can we talk? And I said, I'm struggling. And he said, absolutely. He said, think back over the past year. He said, think about the biggest challenges you've had. Think about the biggest challenges you've had at work. And then if you're listening in, do the same. Think over the past year, what have been the biggest challenges you've had at work? And then he said this. Now, were those challenges mostly character, mindset, or was it competence or skill set? Was it an attitude or an approach to something, or was it that people didn't know what to do? They didn't know how to do the thing. And what I found is that I was working with very bright people who were highly competent. The issue was not skill set. The issue was mindset. And he pointed out that you can't fix a character challenge with a competency solution, and you can't fix a competency solution problem with a character solution. He said these are different ideas. And you can nuance that, but the idea being, is it that the person doesn't know how to read their watch, or is it they don't understand what it means to be punctual? They don't understand the value of it. And if they don't know how to read their watch, then you teach them how to read the watch. And if it's you're trying to teach someone to be punctual, which is not always about being on time, but it is the value of time, then you start putting that expectation. This is what we want more of. And this is what he said to me. He said at Kimray, he said, we were in a meeting one day and we had just written this line in the handbook. Employees are not allowed to come to work, clock in, and sleep in the bathroom on company time. And he went through this whole thing. And he said, we realized we were never going to be creative enough to keep up with people's creativity and breaking the rules. So he said, instead of making longer rules that no one's reading, let's focus on what we want more of. Let's define what we're looking for. And so he began down that process of identifying these are the character qualities that they felt like were important for life. And then he said, and now we're going to start teaching that and rewarding that, because people come to work from all different walks of life. And at work, we need a common language, a neutral common language that's inspiring. And here's the thing, he said, you know, what will happen over time is that managers will always find what's not working. He said, we want to give them the tools to be able to catch people doing it right. And so what I found in that character approach, because I had been teaching ethics for years and missed it, I completely missed it, that it was a two-pronged approach. If I know someone who's highly competent but lacks character, I can't trust them. If I know someone who has a lot of character but they're not competent, I can't trust them. I've got to have both. And as a professor, for years, I had worked on people's competency. They would come in and they would say, you know, I don't know where to go next. I don't know what to do with my career next. And it was like we were adding another 100 horsepower to their engine. And the problem was steering. So I look at character as the steering and the braking. And I look at competence as the engine. And one of my biggest regrets is that we were giving people another 100, 200 horsepower so that they could hit the wall of life faster and harder. Because the issue was they didn't know how to steer. It was a navigational issue. So imagine working in a company that is helping you become the person you want to be and the kind of person you want to do life with. And it's a journey for everybody. And what you'll find is that people will say, well, how do you teach character? Well, the only way to learn character is to be taught. And people say, can you teach character? Well, you can't teach anything to somebody who doesn't want to learn. But outside of that, Jim Rohn said it best, character is not like a fingerprint you're born with. It's something that changes over the course of your lifetime. And so I can learn to be more patient. I can learn to be more thorough. I can learn, and that's what takes, it doesn't allow me just to say, well, I'm not a patient person. I'm not a patient person yet, but this is something I have a responsibility to learn and can learn.
I love the phrase yet. We've had one of our mentors over the years. It's one of his favorite phrases. He'll have a sentence and he'll say yet at the end, as if it's still coming, still developing, still working on. And I love, I'm a big fan of the Drucker quote that is culture eats strategy for breakfast. I mean, that is one of those things from The Advantage, the book Lencioni writes about organizational health trumps everything else in the organization, and how culture unlocks those components of intellectual strengths and all the skill sets, but that the healthy culture unlocks all those things. And one of the things that we've been using the Character Core training, which is what that is. We'll get a pamphlet, and it'll be like one of our recent was about loyalty. And I think Hali wrote a question in about loyalty and how we build loyalty into our organization. And it's so interesting, though, when we put our groups together once a month and we talk about the word loyalty, how loyalty is different through the lens of every person in the organization. And sitting in the room and hearing that, it builds that, as you just said, that common language. So this is one of our things. Culture, every culture has a language. And when we can speak in some commonality around character and the people and the company that we want to be, how much stronger we become. Because I believe you're right. I believe people are looking for a place where they can thrive, where they can be themselves, when their gifts can be unleashed. And that's one of the things that we've been working with our Character Core program. So just to shift a little bit here, Nathan, we love to tell people that we're a leadership company moonlighting as a fastener company. But you guys are doing this every day. You guys are in leadership heavy every single day. But what do you guys do inside the organization to develop your own leaders?
It's interesting because we do a lot of what other companies do as well. All of our employees, we have a budget for their development, for them to be in a learning environment where they are getting access to training, to coaching, to growth opportunities outside of our own company. That can come in a lot of different forms, but the bottom line is that if I want to be a company that's growing, I have to invest in growth. And so that's something in our own company that we do, even outside of our own company. In addition to that, we also have our monthly Character Core focus. And then we have quarterly trainings that we do for ourselves in-house. But every company's in the leadership business. And if you look at what is the difference between the companies that thrive and the companies that don't, it's that balance between leadership and management. It's the effective and efficient. And so leaders are the ones that are the trailblazers. They're taking you down a new path. They are pushing into the future. And then what you'll find with great leaders is they will always have, if they're around for a long time, they'll always have great managers as well. And so you've got one group who's setting the pace. The other group is making it better and better, making it more and more efficient. And so you'll see that dynamic. And so those are the two areas that we focus on: effective, efficient. Are we effective? Are we efficient? And back to some of these great thinkers over time, the great tragedy is when we are efficient at what doesn't matter. And so making sure that we are doing the work well and that the work that we're doing matters and is effective in making a difference. Those are the things that we do. But having a growth mindset as a company is at the heart of everything that we do. We want to grow. We want to learn.
We are with Dr. Nathan Mellor. He is the founder and CEO of Strata Leadership. This is the Nuts and Bolts of Leadership podcast, and we'll be right back.
Threaded Fasteners is a 100% employee-owned company whose mission is to create value in and for the people we serve. So, if you're interested in learning more about how we develop a people-centric culture, or if you're interested in a customized fastener solution, send us an email at culture@threadedfasteners.com. That's culture@threadedfasteners.com.
All right, everyone, we're back on the Nuts and Bolts of Leadership podcast with Dr. Nathan Mellor. Hali, what you got?
Well, I always love to put my research hat on. So before we put together our plan for this episode, I did a little bit of research on Strata's mission. And part of your mission is elevating life at work. And then you also have a set of values, and one of those is going the extra mile. So can you tell us about what both of those mean for your team and how you communicate that?
Absolutely, Hali. And I appreciate your going the extra mile, doing some research about what we do. Thank you very much. When you look at your life and how you invest it, you want to make the biggest impact that you can. And for most adults, the biggest investment of their lives, the biggest investment of their time is their life at work. And so for most people, the biggest investment of your time is your life at work. Your second biggest investment is sleep. Then it drops pretty dramatically down to the third and fourth with time with friends and family, social activities, things like that. And so our recognition was that if you could make a difference in the lives of people at work, that's where you can make the biggest impact. And so what we wanted to do was to elevate life at work. That when you think about, and it's something that you've heard before, but it's when you think about going to work on Sunday and you're thinking about going to work on Monday, that it doesn't make you feel that sense of, in the pit of your stomach, I just don't want to go. And so if we could make life better at work, if we could elevate life at work, if we could have people feel like they were wanted and cared for and treated better at work, if we could do that, we could make life better in a lot of ways. And so that's where that came from, is how do we elevate life at work, and life being the primary word. The second part of going the second mile, a number of years ago, I got to spend some time with Mr. Truett Cathy, who was the founder of Chick-fil-A. This was back before Chick-fil-A was a political thing. It was just a good restaurant kind of deal. And I had asked him to come to Oklahoma City and speak at an event, and unbelievably, he said yes. So he came over and spent a couple days with us, which I still can't believe that he did. And at the end of it, he said what people from the South do. They say, hey, if you're ever in, fill in the blank town, come by and say hello. And he lived in Atlanta. And he said, if you ever come by, if you ever come through town, why don't you come by and say hello? And so I waited like 3 months. And then I told him, hey, I'm coming through town. And I didn't tell him the only reason I was coming through town was to see him, but that's what I was doing. And so I went over there and got to spend time with Mr. Cathy. And I was so amazed by what they were doing and how he modeled that idea of serving. And it's still, Chick-fil-A is unbelievably successful in a very competitive world. 2 years later, his son came through town and was speaking at an event. So I went over there and he introduced a concept called 2M, 2N. Second mile, second nature. 2M, 2N. And he said, this is the secret behind what we do, 2M, 2N. And so what he said was, back in the day where you had the Roman world, the Roman Empire ruled the world, they had the Roman soldiers had the ability to do something that was called impressment. And so if you're walking along, you're a Roman soldier, you're carrying your stuff, you can impress upon someone else the responsibility to carry your things for 1 mile. But the law limited it to 1 mile, which is one of the reasons why they had mile markers. So if I'm walking down the street, I'm a Roman soldier, you're out in your yard, I can say to you, hey, you come over here, carry my stuff. And you had to carry it for 1 mile. It was the law. And it was meant to do two things. One, it kept the soldiers from being as tired. Two, it reminded people that Rome was in charge and they were not. You were enslaved. And so people really resented this. I don't want to carry your stuff for a mile. So they would carry it 1 mile and not a step farther. And so later when Jesus comes along and teaches this idea of go the second mile, he said something that nobody was cool with. What do you mean carry this another mile? I was having to carry it the first mile. And so what they said was, this was Dan Cathy. What he said was, I realized that he was flipping the power structure because when you choose to serve, it changed the dynamic. So mile 1 was a chore. Mile 2 was a choice. And you can't enslave someone who chooses to serve. And so he said, what we do at Chick-fil-A is we are about life transformation. You don't transform someone's lives by meeting an expectation. So he said, mile 1, that's the expectation. That's what you expect when you come into a Chick-fil-A. What do you expect from us? That's mile 1. We don't get any credit for that. He said, transformation does not happen in mile 1. Transformation happens in mile 2. And mile 2 is the difference between chore and choice. I'm going beyond your expectation. So instead of having you stand in line and get your food, if we see a mom wrestling with the kids at the store, we're going to carry the food to their table. And he said, matter of fact, we teach our people to carry it in their left hand, that carry the tray in the left hand, keeping their right hand free. So that when we get the table, they can pull the chair out for mom because it might have been a while since someone's been able to do that for her. And then we, take care of people. Then he said, it's also why we come to your table and say, may I refresh your beverage? He said, I went to a restaurant in northern Alabama, a steak restaurant, very expensive place. And they came by the table and they said, may I refresh your beverage? And Dan said, that sounds expensive and we can say it for free. So we're going to go get your drink and bring it back to you. And when we do, we're going to turn the logo of the Chick-fil-A cup so that you see the Chick-fil-A logo as we're walking it to you. And then we're going to give you your cup. And then we're going to also, if we can, we're going to give you a peppermint because you weren't expecting that. Second mile is what you don't expect. So in our company, we adopted the same idea. Second mile, second nature. What are people not expecting us to do? And that's where life happens. I don't have to do this. I'm choosing to do this. So imagine what it feels like to serve a client that way. And you gave them something they weren't expecting. You did more. That's not a chore to us. It's a choice, and it is life-giving. So for our company, that's a big deal. We'll say that 2M, 2N. What's the second mile thing here? Because here's the reality. Once you do it a few times, that now becomes the new expectation. So I might have to drop some things and then add other new things. Remember back when your insurance company, your agent would send you a hand-signed note on your birthday or Christmas, and you thought, well, they really care about me. Well, after a few years of that, it mattered less. So it might be something different that you have to do to go beyond someone's expectation. All I'm trying to get at is this. When you do something that's second mile, is pushback against burnout, because I'm not just doing a chore. I am choosing to do this. I'll say this and be wrapped up on the thought, and I hope it's helpful, Hali. But like with my dad, every time my mom would get up to go to the store, my dad would say this to me and my brother. My brother's a inner city principal at a school in Little Rock. But he would say this as we were kids, teenagers. Mom would get up, go get in the car to go to the store. And my dad would say this, he's damaged his vocal cords, a very raspy voice, but he'd always say, boys, he said, let's surprise your mother. And while she was pulling out of the driveway, he said, let's clean this house up right now. We jump up, we're cleaning stuff up. We got the vacuum out. We're putting the dishes away. We're doing all this stuff. And then when we hear her car come back in the driveway, we all jump back to where we had been on the couch, recliner, whatever, and sit there like we hadn't done anything. To watch our mother's eyes light up when she walks into the house and sees we cleaned it for her. Now, what is that? It's not a chore. It's a choice. And he was teaching us how to love your wife and how to love your mother. But it was not something that was a chore. It was second mile. Second mile feels very different than first mile.
We love the stories about Chick-fil-A and how you've laid out the idea, Nathan, second mile, second nature. Huge Chick-fil-A, Dan Cathy fans. I heard him talk recently about just how they go about their business and their modeling at the cash register. Just an incredible organization. And I have found so much in listening and learning from their model, even their creative way to serve, not just the fact that they do serve, but as you said, the different ways that they are serving now. So, Nathan, we're kind of moving towards the more personal side of this. You know, we like to ask all of our leaders some of the same questions so that we can create almost like a thread of consistency. What are the things that show up with all the leaders that have been on our show? And we have found quite a bit of consistency. So when someone were to if we were to pull someone out of your office and say, tell us what kind of leader Nathan is, what do you think they would say? How would they describe your leadership style?
Well, what I've told them repeatedly is humble. And so that they would all, I'm kidding. You're not supposed to say that one. I'm totally kidding. No, I would hope they would say authentic, committed, someone who is willing to serve and really wants to serve. I was told by one of our clients one time, they had interviewed a number of leadership companies and they chose ours. And they said, do you want to know why? I said, I really would like to know. They said, because you have heart and you care. And this was a big aviation outfit. I'm glad he picked up on that because it was true. And I would hope that they would say that you cared. And if I could go a step farther, I don't know how you do well if you don't love people. And I think you got to take the risk to love people. And it is not a pain-free path. But I love what I get to do. I love who we get to serve. And I love the team that I'm on. And I would hope that they would know that.
And I love the phrase you used just then. One of our phrases, it's one of those get to things. We get to do these things. We get to do. And as you said, loving people, first of all, it's not popular. And as you said, it's not pain-free. It's not a management style or leadership style that many have adopted. And you will have your heart stomped on when you become vulnerable into loving people. That's just part of it. The last thing I wanted to ask you, Nathan, you know, we love, well, it would be unfair for me not to ask you about who's inspired you, but I've heard so much about your dad. I'm assuming that's exactly who you're going to talk about as who's someone who inspired you as a leader. Is there someone in the professional world outside from your dad that was inspirational in your journey?
Sure. I've been very fortunate. I think you can become a very effective leader by being around horrible leaders, and you kind of get a sense of what you don't want to do. And then it is perhaps a faster path to be around great leaders who give you a model. And I have had many of those. And there are all kinds of leaders. There are quiet leaders, there are the charismatic leaders, there are all different types. But I'll just mention one that meant a lot to me my senior year of high school, I moved back to Mobile for one quarter. I got to come home to play football. And then I went and had to go back home to St. Louis where we had moved. And that's where I graduated from high school. But there was a teacher at the time, Tony Kendall, Mr. Kendall. And that family, they were a young family with no kids at the time. They knew that it would mean a lot to me to be able to come back to my to be with my senior class for that first quarter. And they opened their home to me and let me live in their home for several months to play football. And I went back home, and then they had a senior class trip at the end of the year. And Mr. Kendall, there was a very strict rule, no candy at school. And Mr. Kendall sold M&Ms for the rest of the year, $1 per one, which back then was like movie theater price for M&Ms. And I didn't know why he was doing, but what he was doing was that he knew that I was not going to have the money needed to go on a trip like that, on that senior class trip. And all year long, he's selling M&Ms. At the end of the year, he calls and says, we've got a spot for you. And I said, I can't afford that. And he said, it's already been taken care of. That kind of leader who is intentionally trying to help someone else have a better life. I could point to many of them, but Tony Kendall's a pretty good place to start. Still teaches history down the street from you at Mobile Christian School. We'll make sure to get him a link to the podcast when the episode comes out. And lastly, Nathan, your story has been incredible. We have I will tell, we should put a warning at the beginning of this. You need to make sure you're not driving listening to this, because you'd be writing down notes with one knee on the steering wheel. We've got a lot of emerging leaders from our company and other companies that have tuned in today, and you've dropped a lot of wisdom on develop leaders and how to build it better. But speak now directly to the emerging leader. That might be the person who hasn't even seen it yet, not even aware that they can step into the leadership journey. How would you encourage them? This is what they could do to get started today. You know, what I find with a lot of leaders is that they don't see themselves as leaders first. Other people see them as that, and they're sometimes surprised by it. We have a program called the Institute for Emerging Leaders. And what I've been surprised by, maybe not, I shouldn't be surprised by, but I have been surprised by, when we ask what's the biggest challenge of becoming a leader, and about 80% would say self-doubt, that they just don't know if they can do it. They don't know if they've got what it takes, or if people really knew me, would they want to really follow me? That imposter syndrome. And I would just say to them that you grow into the need, but to be open, that if you care about people and you want to help people have a better life, what if it's you? And would you try it on for size? And so to me, it's saying yes to the first opportunity, and then understanding that it's a process. But trust the people around you, because they might see you as a leader before you see yourself that way. What I like to say, it wasn't original with me, but what I like to say is self-awareness leads to other awareness. And when you become more self-aware that people do seem to follow, well, now I can use that for the benefit of the people around me. But to just be open to it, and to be comfortable with the fact that it's going to take a while before it feels comfortable. That's good. And Nathan, I know there are a lot of people listening now that would want to know how to get in touch with you. So before we let you go, if people want to reach out to you and learn more about Strata Leadership, and particularly about the Character Core program, how can they reach out? If they go to our website, which is strataleadership.com, STRATA leadership.com, you can find the information about the Character Core. What the Character Core does is it gives you a monthly focus on a different character quality in a very positive way. And what it allows you to do is to catch your people doing it right. So through this program, what happens is that it gives you a reason to recognize every one of your employees over the course of a year for their character. And this was what really meant a lot to me. We've had companies that have been doing this now for 25 years. Imagine now 25 years with one piece of paper for each year where they were recognized for their character. And imagine someone called you and they said this, hey, we were cleaning out the house, and in the attic, we found this old book, and it was a journal from your great-great-great-grandfather, and we tracked you down. And it was 1 year of his life, and it's leather journal that we found. How much would that be worth to you? And for me, it'd be worth a lot. Now imagine finding a folder that had 20 years telling me about someone's character. And this is what we found. People recognize other people's character at work in 2 moments. We recognize your character at your retirement party, and we recognize your character at your funeral, neither of which is real helpful at work. So what you find is that the keeper of the culture are the people who are telling the stories of the culture. Imagine being able to catch your people doing it right and telling people about who they are on a regular basis. You're rewarding what you want more of. And whatever you reward, you're going to get more of. So to be intentional about that rewarding, what we want to do is set people up for catching people doing it right. Some of the companies we serve, they'll send a letter home to their families. You may not know why we appreciate your mom so much at work. We wanted to tell you. What an incredible thing. And so that's the character core. We do executive coaching. We do training. We have programs that you can send people to. But bottom line is we want to serve people and help leaders, because when leaders do their job well, a lot of lives are impacted. And that's what we're committed to.
Well, Nathan, I can't tell you how much I appreciate you taking the time to be on our podcast. We've been looking forward to this for quite some time. So thank you for your time. And what an honor it is to have you today.
Well, the honor is mine. And if you're ever coming through Oklahoma City, stop by and say hello.
I'm going to wait 3 months and I'm going to call you.
Perfect.
All right. This is the Nuts and Bolts of Leadership podcast, and Hali and I will be right back. Hali, what a great episode with Nathan Mellor. Good night. I mean, I've got nugget after nugget after nugget. What'd you go with?
I'm going to go with the "You Have More to Give," his story about the football player who, tried to tap out, and his dad, who was the coach, really knew that he had more to give. And it resonated with me. I've talked a lot about my running. And when I first started my running, I would only hit a mile. My goal was to hit the fastest mile that I could, but I would always stop at a mile. And so now on my running journey, I'm trying to do distance instead of speed. And I still catch myself watching those miles. And I know that I always have more to give, but it's hard when you hit that mile marker. You just want to stop.
I love when we talk about the pushing through the hard, because it resonates with everyone. Everyone can visualize a story or a place in their life where they ran up against something that was hard and they pushed through it, and then what that became. And it was, I think for years, talking about the mile, I think that the time on the mile, there was such a stigma around this part couldn't be broken. There's just no way to break this time. But once it was broken, it got broken 4 times the same year. It just, somebody had to push through that. Mm-hmm. I took the 2M, 2N, second mile, second nature, and choosing over chore. And of course, I'm always going to gravitate to the Chick-fil-A story. I love the Kathy family, and I love the model that they're building about serving. But Hali, I'm just, your title doesn't define you. Try it on for size. Loving the underdog, the life coach. Your life is not your own. The identity, the mind shift versus a skill set shift. I mean, I had a nugget full. A page full of nuggets. It was a nugget day here on the podcast with Nathan Mellor. So, Hali, appreciate you being with me. Until we meet again, tighten up.
Tighten up.
Thank you for joining the Nuts and Bolts of Leadership podcast, brought to you by the employee owners of Threaded Fasteners. If you enjoyed our conversation, please subscribe to, rate, and review the Nuts and Bolts of Leadership wherever you listen to your favorite podcasts. Do you have a leadership story to tell or a question to ask? Email us at podcast@threadedfasteners.com. That's podcast@threadedfasteners.com. This show is made possible by our family at Threaded Fasteners, Inc. Our mission is to create value in and for the people we serve. Interested in learning more about TFI and how we create value in our team, in our communities, and in our customers? Visit threadedfasteners.com. Thank you again for listening. I'm your co-host and producer, Hali Gibson.
And I'm your host, Billy Duray.
This show is edited and produced by Johnny Glenn and our friends at Deep Fried Studios.